up guys, welcome back to another GeekaWhat video. In this video, I'm going to be taking a look at the brand new, newly released RTX 3050. Nvidia's latest GPU offering for the budding 1080p gamer has landed, and I figured we'd put together a system to check out if it's really worth it. As if Nvidia's latest budget GPU wasn't enough though, I've also picked up Intel's latest budget CPU, the 12400. Could this be the best budget gaming combo in 2022? I guess we're about to find out. I've also picked up one of Intel's latest B660 motherboards and some DDR4 memory to see just how much price to performance we can get with some of the latest hardware on the market. Without further ado though, let's kick things off by actually getting the thing put together, and we'll test out the performance a little bit later. The RTX 3050 looks to be a very exciting proposition. We've missed out on GPUs at this tier for quite some time. The old 1650, 1660 Super are probably the closest thing we've had, and this should perform significantly better than them. With 8GB of video memory, support for the latest ray tracing and DLSS technology, remember this is an RTX card, not a GTX card, an important bonus and distinction to make. This looks to compete directly with AMD's new 6500 XT. A GPU that actually has a slightly lower MSRP, but is rumoured to have worse availability, meaning these two could be pretty level pegging. The word on the street here in the UK at least is that stock and availability of these should be better than the previous launches we've seen from Nvidia as of late, though of course demand for GPUs is still huge, so the verdict is still out on that one. I'll talk more about this ASUS design, specifically the STRIX cooler and whether it's really necessary later in the video. But first, I think it's about time we take the motherboard and install as many components onto this now. This right here is ASUS's Prime B660D4. The brand new B660 chipset looks to compete directly with B550, AMD's current offering, and actually shows a good amount of progression over Intel's previous B560. Not only do you get memory overclocking support, Gen 4 SSD support, and you can see on this board we've got 3 expansion slots as well. The top is reinforced, helping to prevent GPU sag and strain on the motherboard over time. I'm really excited though to couple up the i5 12400. I don't want this video to be too overshadowed by the 3050, as this is just an important launch for the budget gamer. Intel have been pretty weak when it comes to value propositions over the last few years, and with how strong 12th gen has been already, a cheap 12th gen chip is exactly what the market needs right now. You can get it with or without graphics. The F version doesn't come with those included, and of course this isn't an overclockable CPU, but it doesn't matter. The clock speeds are more than good enough, and the combination of Intel's performance and efficiency cores gives a solid multi-threaded performance too. Things have just got a bit more interesting. So here we can see the 12400 itself. We'll come back to that because I've just spotted that Intel have included a new and improved black stock cooler. Okay. Now, I was originally planning to pair our CPU up with something like a Hyper 212 RGB Black Edition. But if we're not overclocking the CPU, this makes more sense and saves us another $30 or $40. Let's go with this. Aesthetically, I think it looks good, and I really like the progress Intel have made here. Their older generation included coolers were rubbish, so I am so happy to see this included. It looks really cool as well. One thing that has changed with the new Intel chips is the installation process. You still have to pull up the retention arm, but it kind of opens away from each other, so just something to bear in mind. Now on your CPU, your Intel CPU, which is a bit more square than the last generation, a bigger chip actually, you will find yourself a triangle. You want to match this up with the triangle on the bottom left-hand corner of the CPU socket. For us, that just means dropping the CPU in like so. Give it a little bit of a wiggle, but you shouldn't feel any pins breaking or anything like that. Pop your retention cover down and the black plastic will pop off. Secure the arm and that's basically it. The stock cooler that comes included actually has pre-applied thermal paste, so that's always really, really good to see. It means you haven't got to worry about adding on any of your own. We can then go ahead and literally just place it on the CPU and push each of these plastic pins through the 4 holes on the motherboard. Here we go. Hear that little click sound? Do that again. There's the second one. There's the third one. Let me just show you that nice and close. All you got to do is put your finger on it, apply a nice piece of downward pressure, and it clicks nice and easily. Give them all another little bit of a push to make sure they're all in, and then locate your CPU fan header on the top of the motherboard. Take the included cable, pop this up to your fan header, and that's basically it. Now, these new Intel CPUs support either DDR5 or DDR4 memory. I'm not exactly sure how many B660 boards will favour DDR4 over DDR5, but you should definitely pick those. There's no point buying stupidly expensive memory for an i5-12400. DDR5 is great tech, and I'm glad Intel supported it on the new architecture, but it's just not ready yet for the more budget-oriented gamer. Locate your RAM DIMM slots. We've got 4 on this board, great for upgrades, great for dual channel, just better than 2 overall, and then line your memory up. Apply a bit of pressure, click it into place, and that's basically it. I've gone for a white memory kit as it will match the case choice today and also plays into the hands of our silver accents. Really nice to see. I'm just a bit obsessed with this cooler. Yes, Intel. Come on. Whoever at Intel is pushing this like 12th gen, new architecture, new cooler, I love you. Whoever you are. Finally. You know, how long do these things take? To wrap things up on the motherboard front, we've got one more component to go, and it's the component that installs here. It is, of course, our M.2 SSD drive. When it comes to picking suitable storage for a build like this, you need to keep in mind just how many gaming titles you're looking to play, but also the speed. The new hardware is so powerful that using something like a hard drive can actually become a bottleneck, where it can't read game files quick enough and slows down the frame rate. That is the last thing that we want to happen. A Gen 3 SSD though will be fine. Gen 4 drives are great, a lot more expensive and frankly too quick for what we need today. Perfect though if you're doing something like video editing or you're going for an i9, but in a build like this one, to be honest with you, a Gen 3 drive is not going to cause you any issues whatsoever. Still be pretty quick. This Seagate one is in the region of about 3 gigabytes a second on the read and the write, making it an awesome choice. We've done a review of it on our website and I'd urge you to go and check that one out. Take your SSD, slide it into the slot at sort of a 45-degree angle. You don't want to pop it in completely flat and then push it down. That downward pressure will hold it into place. You then want to pop the cover back down and these screws on the cover will stop your drive from going anywhere. Plus there's a thermal pad on the bottom which will help to transfer heat away from the drive, keeping it nice and cool. Once you've done that, you can grab your case and move the motherboard into place. That was a bit of rhyming for you there. Now this right here is Corsair's iCUE 4000X, but to be honest with you, anything on their 4000 series, including the cheaper 4000D Airflow, will work well. When it comes to a case, this really is an area you can save yourself loads and loads of money. But I figured we've got quite a large graphics card, we've got a nice aesthetic going on, and the case is all part of that. You can find some great deals on these as well from Corsair at the moment, but if it doesn't quite take your fancy, or you want to save yourself some cash, take a look at our recent video where we rounded up the top 10 cases for all the different budgets for 2022. A really great video, so go and check that out if you're in a bit of doubt as to what chassis is best for you. I've just gone ahead and prepped things a little bit by taking off the side panel and just flipping the case round to this side. Because this is a micro ATX motherboard, we will need to adjust some of the standoffs. The standoffs are the black stoppers in the case that you install the motherboard onto, and they basically stop it from grounding out on the bottom of your motherboard. If you can see here, we can lay the case down flat and you'll be able to see what I mean more easily. We'll circle all of the standoffs on your screen now, and that will show you where they are. What we need to do is get them to match up to the holes on the bottom of the motherboard. In our instance, we've got 3 at the top, so they're all in the right place. A further 3 along the middle, they're in the right place too, this is going well, and then just 2 along the bottom. One of these is in the correct location, the other needs moving up very slightly, so we'll go ahead and do that and you'll see the difference on your screen too. Clip in the rear I/O shield to the back of the case before sliding the motherboard in and securing it down through the 3, 6, 8 screw hole locations. 3 at the top, 3 across the middle, 2 along the bottom. Nice and simple. Love it, love it, love it. Once we've done that, we can then go ahead and install the graphics card. Now the 3050 is the bit I'm sure you've all been waiting for, and we'll check out detailed performance numbers, including some comparisons to the other GPUs on the market in a few moments time. This ASUS STRIX cooler in particular looks fantastic, triple fan design, loads of RGB, really nice, but you will pay a fairly hefty price premium for it. A price premium that arguably during the current climate and with a GPU that's on the lower end is is maybe not quite so clever. You will get great overclock speeds, you'll get some fantastic temperatures, and it'll be great for like water cooling with that really, really enhanced PCB, but I would argue something like an ASUS dual card would be a better choice. So go and take a look at those, but either way, we'll be evaluating the 3050 performance on merit. It's not going to change a huge deal depending on the cooler you go for. It's always quite scary opening a GPU for the first time. Very often on the channel, we'll get loaned graphics cards that have already been to other YouTubers, other media, that ASUS very kindly sent us over before launch, brand new, never been touched by a single soul. My heart rate's through the roof right now. I really do not want to be that guy who goes ahead and rips the box for the graphics card. I'll leave that job to somebody else. Here we go. And then we can open it up. Oh, what a tease. There's an ASUS card on the top. I can't see the GPU. Oh, beautiful. What a good looking card. I know I was saying something like an ASUS Dual would be more value oriented, but this does look pretty sick. This has got to be up there with one of the most insane 3050s on the market, basically full stop. Now in our chassis today, we need to remove a couple of PCIe covers. These are the little metal covers that go to the left of the motherboard. To find out which ones, hover the GPU over your slot. You can see here why we needed such a large case, and then go ahead and remove the second and third slot covers. I've only gone and got the wrong slots, haven't I? It's actually the top two, not the second and the third. Let's rewind that back again, pretend those slots were never out, and then try and insert the graphics card. Oh dear. Push the retention clip on the socket back, making it easier to slide in, and then insert the GPU into place. A nice satisfying click, followed by a couple of screws to fasten it down, and then we can move on to the power supply. Specifically, this right here is Corsair CX750F RGB. Really, really nice power supply, this one. Fully modular, has all the bells and whistles we could possibly want, allowing us to only plug in the cables that we really, actually, genuinely need to use. You can see here we've got a big selection of them that come as standard. The first of those is the one that powers up our motherboard. This just plugs up to the top left of the power supply, with the other end going to the motherboard, like so. We've also got our PCIe power connector. This is dual 6+8 pin to power up the lovely RTX 3050. A SATA power harness for those old style SATA hard drives is never a bad idea either. The reason for this one being that it will allow you to power up any RGB hubs or anything along those lines. And then finally, a CPU power connection. One end, of course, goes to the power supply, the other up to the CPU in the top left corner. This particular power supply includes white cables, which I think will look quite nice in this build, though if you prefer black and you want to pick up a black case, they do this power supply in the black colourway as well, so plenty of options for you there. As we go ahead and remove the side panel. It's then a fairly simple case of sliding the PSU into the rear of the chassis, like so, spinning it round a full 180 degrees and lining the unit up. We can then install it through the 4 screw hole locations on each corner. There's actually 8 screw holes on the back of the case. That's to account for the power supply being the right way up or upside down. Both are very viable configurations. It just gives you plenty of options. And once that's been done, we've got ourselves a really nice looking system. But of course, that's not exactly why you came here. You want to see how well the 3050 performs. And detailed benchmarking is to follow. But before that, it's time to boot the system up, get all of our RGB going, and see how good it looks when it's all powered up. I'll see you in a second, but first, roll that montage. Awesome stuff. Now that we've seen just how good the system looks when it's all powered up, it's time to evaluate its performance. And to do so, we've tested a wide variety of titles on the 3050, and we'll also be comparing it with graphs like these against loads of other relevant GPUs that we think are worth considering. Before any of that though, on your screen now is a summary, a snapshot view of all the different games we tested and the frame rates we achieved. It's not a very contextual view, but it does give you all the raw data. So if there's a particular frame rate you need to achieve at 1080p, this will indicate whether or not that's possible. You'll also be able to find max CPU and GPU temperatures for this build on your screen now as well. Let's kick things off by taking a closer look at GTA 5. This is our first title today. We tested out at 1080p high settings in the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode, and achieved a healthy 135 FPS on average. When compared to the 2060 from last gen, we got more frames per second, which is great to see, and it also beat out the 6600 XT from AMD, a more expensive card than the new 3050. It didn't sit far below the 3060 either, and the 2060 Super, while it showed a lead on the 3050, something we've seen across the board, it was all within the same rough ballpark. To be clear, the general rule of thumb with a GPU is that a new card should perform about the same as its bigger brother from the previous generation, aka a 3070 should be a roughly equivalent to a 2080, a 3060 should be roughly equivalent to a 2050 or 1660 Super that came before it. And in this case, that rule seems to bear true, as we achieve 2 frames per second more than a 2060, but remarkably, but interestingly a few less than the refreshed 2060 Super. Let's see if this pattern continues in Apex Legends, where we tested out once again at 1080p high settings. Here we didn't get quite as much mileage on the 3050 as I hoped we might. It sat at around 103 frames per second on average, which was actually lower than the 2060, higher of course than the 1660 Super, thank goodness, and markedly lower than the 3060. Apex often throws around some interesting results, and typically favours AMD cards, something we saw here where the 6600 XT pulled out a pretty strong lead. It was a fairly similar story in Fortnite, where we tested at 1080p high and then competitive settings, which we'll come on to next. The 3050 actually stacked up better here, sitting once again above the 2060 and 6600 XT, but below the 2060 Super. Although the AMD cards showed their muscle, as the 6600 XT came far closer to the 3050 and of course the 3060 than it has done in our previous tests. Tuning up to competitive settings, where everything basically gets scaled down, except the render distance which stays at far. Admittedly, your bottleneck will be more CPU bound, something which will be disadvantaging some of the higher end cards. Interestingly here, the 3050 pulled a significant lead over the 2060 and even beat out by 1 frame per second the 2060 Super, a card that we've seen on the whole to be outperforming the 3050. The AMD cards were sort of outliers in this instance. Similarly with AMD's own APU, you get some impressive results with that in Fortnite, and I think it's down to game and driver optimization. Even still, the 3050 slotted perfectly into the Nvidia lineup as we thought it would, just below the 3060, and of course a good chunk below the more expensive 3060 Ti. But what about a game like Valorant, sticking with the high frame rate theme for a few moments? Well, here the 3050 gave us some really solid results, once again slotting just below the 3060, beating out the 2060 and even the 2060 Super. AMD cards flagged far behind, while the frame rate difference of the 3050 over something like a GTX 16 series was also markedly impressive. The 6600 XT performed well, although the gap between it and the 3050, cards which I must admit are not actually designed to compete with one another, was far smaller than you might expect. Admittedly though, the results weren't always this clear cut. Call of Duty Warzone is a great example. The 3050 actually lags behind the 2060 by 6 frames per second, and behind the 2060 Super by 16 frames per second. This is a really interesting result, where the 3050 in some titles performs extraordinarily well, and in others doesn't quite slot in as you might expect. Now to be clear, it's still below the 3060, which itself was below the 3060 Ti, but even still, an interesting result. It's the same story in the new Call of Duty Vanguard, a title you might expect to be better optimized for newer GPUs. But no, the 3050 beat out the 1660 Super, thank goodness, but didn't quite hit the marks of the 2060 Super at 101 frames per second. It was then sizably below the 3060, which appears, for all intensive purposes, to be a far more powerful GPU. That's not to say the 3050 didn't give us some great performance numbers. It did, and there's some huge selling points of the card I'm going to come on to in a moment, which actually leave me quite impressed with Nvidia's latest offerings. We also tested out the likes of Battlefield 2042, where with DLSS enabled, we achieved 106 frames per second on average. That is an incredibly good result actually, at 1080p high settings, while Forza Horizon 5 yielded around 98 frames per second on average at 1080p high settings. Once again, a good result tested in the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode. The likes of Halo Infinite also stacked up well, with 87 FPS on average at 1080p high settings once again. The 3050 is definitely Nvidia's latest budget offering. It's markedly less powerful than something like a 3060 or 3060 Ti. The 3060 Ti is more akin to a 3070 than it is is a budget GPU, and you won't be gaming at 1440p on the 3050, but that's not the point. This is designed to be an entry-level, but still a very strong entry-level 1080p GPU, capable of running all the latest AAA titles at 1080p 60 FPS. And if it can do that while sticking roughly to the MSRP that Nvidia has designated, or at least in stock, then in my book, it's actually a success. It blows the new 6500 XT out of the water. Interesting, because it's the only card we've not been able to get hold of before a launch in the last 12 or 18 months. Either way though, the 3050 shows itself to be an incredibly promising proposition. It's also reportedly particularly awful at GPU mining, even without any low hash rate versions considered, which is very, very good news for gamers. Once again though, I just hope Nvidia can make enough of them that we can actually buy them and use them, and suddenly start getting back to a bit of normality, with $700, $800, $900 or $1,000 builds you can actually buy right now. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a big old like rating. Thanks a lot for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.